for me, this totality, if you and I stop this segment right now and start over and say, all right, spring training's here, let's start. Tomorrow, what do we got? How are we pitching? What are we going with? Boy, oh boy. I mean, I'm perplexed a little bit about it, about the money they've sunk into this year, what the expectation is, and what they're putting value on these starts in the here and now, but really doing it in a rented pickup in some sort of way that the optics of it aren't good. But if they're madman statistics and it all works out, great. But it feels like they spent a lot of money on the short track of something that they feel like can be reliable, but they paid a premium for it, in my mind.
Well, I mean, I don't know if they paid a premium for it. I mean, Nestor, $15 million isn't that much money anymore relative to the way you thought about it 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 15. I mean, that's part of it, right? I mean,
But what you expect out of that money is all I'm asking about.
oh, but
Yeah.
what do you expect out of that? You know what I mean?
What
Like,
did we expect out of Craig Kimbrell for 17 million or whatever it was,
oh,
13 million?
I mean, but that's a little bit of apples to oranges because you're talking starter to compared to closer. But again, for me, I look at their rotation right now, and I'll say this before I get to my big point. In terms of number three, number four, number five options, it could look a lot worse in terms of, when you're talking about Charlie Morton, who I would probably pencil in as my number three right now. Eflin and Rodriguez, whichever, 1-2, 2-1, however you want to order those two. But, Dean Kramer is a number four. I mean, Dean Kramer was their number two or number three starter at the end of last year, right? Because of the injuries they had. But you're talking about Dean Kramer. You have Tomoyoki Sagano, who right now I'd pencil in as my number five, when you're talking about a $13 million contract for him, the way that they gave him. Uh, and then that's, Cade Povich finished the end of last year. Well, you have Chase McDermott, you have Trevor Rogers, who, even though his four starts were disastrous, the Orioles didn't just give away Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers and then say, oh, we don't like Trevor Rogers. They clearly like Trevor Rogers. Now, they think they can fix him, right? And this goes back to,
Yeah,
the
if
point
you
that
and I are hosting the hot stove show on BAL, we
they think
have
they
to
can fix
say,
him.
but they think they can fix them, and you and I can sit here and say they've got
And if,
enough. Bill, this is what they're good at. This
right,
is what
right.
they're really good at. And this is what they're going to go into Mr. Rubenstein, who doesn't know much about baseball, and say, we're geniuses about this. We're such geniuses that guys like Luke Jones and Aparicio and Mark Messina and a whole bunch of other people that sit around and have done this for 30 or 40 years on the radio, they have a kind of a hard time following along in this new way, even though you're an analytics nerd and I'm trying to figure it all out. I'm just trying to have it all make sense from a fan's
Yeah.
perspective that I can package it up. And that's where these signings to me, they don't feel like Roland Heeman or I was out at breakfast. I want to give a free plug here to Zeke's Coffee and Thomas Rhodes because Rasig had me out for coffee on Friday. And as it turns out, I'm there when they're not talking Lamar football. We went up talking baseball, and now Rassig's kids named me Nasty Nestor. We went through this whole pitching thing with Todd Froworth, and it was a big baseball conversation. And everybody at the table's got it. To your point, a very different level of knowledge to be able to talk about all this. And these guys were nerds. Like these were older guys. I don't want to be mean because I know they listen. Because they tell me they listen all the time. But they were guys that were like jogging me as I became the guy I am at Moeller's house on holidays, which is the Trivial Pursuit guy. I have all the answers. I'm the sports answer guy. So, and which is you're that guy in my world, right? When it comes to this, and I said, they were talking about Morton had been signed. This was on Friday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they had talked about it. They were talking about, well, what are they going to do with all the money? Are they going to use it on relief pitching like they did that one year? Hey, Ness, remember that year they signed all the relievers because they couldn't sign a starter? And we were trying to come up with the names. And I'm like, well, it was the Timlin, Mike DeJohn, DeWitt, DeJohn. I was thinking of like all of these names of all of the
But
relief pitchers.
Buddy Groom that era.
little after that, and it was
Okay.
after Orozco.
Yeah, yeah.
So, right, and it was sort of early with the big left-hander BJ Ryan, right? Came
Hmm.
after that. There was a period, there was an off season where they couldn't, I got Confederate money here.
Right.
I don't know what to do with it. And they signed a bunch of relief pitchers. And at the time, they sent me on the radio. I had pictures with those guys, dude. It was Dijon, Mike Dijon, whatever, oh 03, oh 04, oh 05, there were like three pitchers that they signed. And part of their thing was, well, that starting pitching's costing a lot of money. So the way we're going to get around that is we're going to usurp the innings with, like it was all of the 20-year ago science trying to out Billy Bean in the day. I'm just trying to figure out in a vacuum with 35-year-old pitchers at 13 million, and because they're not just throwing darts, man. This isn't the old man putting his feet up being talked into stuff. This is like Elias has a plan here. I don't know what it is. I'm trying to be respectful of it because they won 91 games last year, and I, I'm trying to understand how they're viewing the totality of all of this because I would think it's new age, and part of it is they couldn't sign Corbin Burns. They didn't have enough money. He wanted to be on whatever it is. They have a philosophy on this, and it's for you and me as journalists try to figure it out a little bit, right? I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, and so I made the point that they've bolstered their back of the rotation depth, right? Even a couple names that I didn't even mention are guys that are in the mix, that you would go, all right, here are your eight, nine, maybe 10 guys that might make starts for you this year. And of course, you get down to eight, nine, 10. Those aren't guys that no team's going to look at their eight, nine, and 10 options and say, I want them to make a lot of starts. But we also know that it's the reality of baseball.
That's where
Pitchers get
Suarez
hurt.
came from.
Sure, 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 exactly. So, I wasn't even including Suarez in that discussion. But a couple things here. One, it's still where is the upside coming from? Where you look at this and you think about it in the same way that we talked about the playoff rotation for the entire season last year. We talked about it. Burns would be the number one. Who's going to be the number two? Is Bradish going to be there? Is he healthy? Is Grayson Rodriguez going to
But
be the two?
Eflin was not a
Then
guy we ever talked about.
Oh,
He
and
wasn't a
then they
part of
added
that.
Eflin back into the mix, right? So you have Grayson Rodriguez, who the upside is still there. We've seen him look dominant. We can go back to that start he made against Tampa Bay in mid-September of 23 when things were dicey at that point for the division, and the Orioles were kind of, Tampa Bay had pulled into a tie with them, if you recall. And Grayson Rodriguez went out there and shoved for 8 innings and looked every bit the part of anything Corbin Burns did last year. So you still have that upside, but you've had a Grayson Rodriguez who's missed a sizable portion of two of the last three seasons with lat issues, right? You have a guy who has yet to make 30 starts in a major league season. Forget about even 200. I mean, Corbin Burns threw 194 last year, right? I mean, even, and I talked about this with you a lot last year, even in the context of what we viewed Corbin Burns as being, he wasn't what Mike Messina was, right? I mean, he wasn't a guy that threw 250 innings or go way back and think about guys who threw 300 plus innings. I mean, that you're a dinosaur if you think about it in those terms at this point. So part of my point here is I still have concerns, very substantial concerns about the upside of their rotation. I will say this much. If they're still in the hunt to make a trade for a Dylan Cease or a Luis Castillo, which those are two pitchers who reportedly are available, and they've been, not linked to the Orioles in reporting, but in terms of a speculative nature, we've talked about that. If you go out and sign Charlie Morton in the way that the Orioles did, I'm spitballing here. This is not anything that's out there. I'm not hearing this, but does a Charlie Morton signing allow you to then potentially dangle someone like a Dean Kramer? Because Dylan Cease is with the Padres, right? If they're going to trade him, that doesn't mean the Padres are rebuilding, right? That doesn't mean they're tearing everything down. It means he's got an expiring contract and they're clearly pivoting from their late owner who was spending a lot of money, and they're not going to be spending as much the way it's looking with the way they proceeded.
Cease
But
going to get more than Burns?
Man, that
Well,
put
my
me on the
point to this would
spot.
be you can deal for him, and then he's a $250 million pitcher too, right? Or if
Right,
you're going to
right,
give up an
sure, sure.
Ortiz or give up a rental,
But
because
but
we
my
we saw Burns as a rental the whole. We never talked
sure,
about him
exactly. I mean,
as a marriage.
I mean, you heard me say for months that I wasn't sure I'd want to give Corbin Burns a long-term contract, and not because I don't like Corbin Burns,
Well,
but it's
this is
just
the other way to do it. This and
but part of
75 million for
but the spitballing idea that I was giving you here with this, and I'm thinking about this just in the context of 2025, not whether you'd re-sign Cease or whether you'd acquire Castillo, who's under contract for a couple more years. But if you are loading up on back end of the rotations types when you've signed Sagano and you've signed Charlie Morton, perhaps could that be a signal that you'd be willing to part with someone like a Dean Kramer? Because, hey, look, Dean Kramer is what he is, right? He's not really a guy you want to start in a playoff game, but he's part of a major league rotation and he's going to give you starts for 6 months. And, for the most part, he stayed healthy. My point would be that type of pitcher, that kind of profile might be appealing to the Padres in a Dylan Cease trade, or might be appealing to another team that's looking to move their pitcher who's approaching free agency. But Dean Kramer's got a couple more years of club control. Now, Dean Kramer still has value to the Orioles. I want to be clear, but maybe that's why you sign Charlie Morton, because then you say, hey, Charlie Morton for 2025 will be at least as good, if not better, than Dean Kramer. So maybe we can move, and that might be one of the biggest pieces you give up for Dylan Cease. Again, I'm spitballing here, or it might just be that the Orioles are just saying, you know what, we're a 1 year contract kind of team, and hey, how much club control did Corbin Burns have when they acquired him? 1 year. So you look at the profile and you look at their type. That's kind of how it goes on. Now, that upside part of the discussion aside that I just acknowledged that I have concerns about. The other part of this, and you touched on this, whether you meant to or not, the bullpen. And you're looking at the state of the bullpen. And if you're going to have a rotation that is not going to have a Corbin Burns at the top, it has a Grayson Rodriguez and a Zach Eflin. And, even Zach Eflin, age 31 season, is Zach Eflin really a number one or a number two, or would he be better as a number three? I think that's a very valid uh, question to bring up, but it's where they are right now. So if you're not going to go about it in terms of acquiring another ace or another number two pitcher, let's say, number two starter, then maybe you pivot and say, what can you do to add to your bullpen? Now, Felix Bautista's coming back, and there's no reason at this point to think that Felix Bautista. Now, he might not be 2023 Felix Bautista right off the bat, but assuming he's healthy and he's had ample time, he's had well over a year by the time he gets to spring training. You're talking about, 16 months. I think he had his surgery in October of 23. So there's no reason to think that Felix Bautista won't be some good version of Felix Bautista, but you need more than that, right? You've got Yennier Cano, you've brought back Sir Anthony Dominguez. Gregory Soto looked better in September than he did in August. But you look at that and say, okay, if you're not going to go get a stud pitcher, a stud starter to replace Corbin Burns, fine. You better do some work to that bullpen then, right? And again, this it's all about winning games, right? This isn't about who has the best number one starter or who has the better number three starter. It's who wins more games. And another way for the Orioles to do that would be to fortify their bullpen and strengthen their bullpen. I like the state of their bullpen right now with projected to be healthy Felix Bautista than I did a year ago with Craig Kimbrell, replacing him for a season. But you could still add there. So,
Well, saying $17 million is worth 150 innings, right? And $13 million on Sugano, who's never thrown a pitch in the big leagues, is
right.
worth, whatever 128 innings they expect out of him, right? I guess, right? So then the bullpen, to your point, high leverage, very specialized, very, very different than we mentioned all those old relief pitchers, that one trick ponies and Kevin Hickey's coming in and, being getting one guy out, or Mariano Rivera getting four guys out sometimes, right? Like whatever those numbers are, the value of that in the seventh, eighth, or ninth inning when you're in Yankee Stadium, because Corbin Burns can't help you then.
Yeah.
Pay him all
Well,
you want. He ain't going to be in a game in the eighth inning, fourth time around, in a
right.
let's knuckle bite 4-3 game, runner on, and, the best you got is Craig Kimbrell.
Yeah, and that's and my goodness, I'm going to sound like a broken record here because you heard me talk about this from spring training on last year in terms of the state of the bullpen and feeling they needed more. And you just said it. This is again where we need to recognize the state of the game. We're not going back, at least anytime soon. We're not going back to the days of pitchers going 8 or 9 innings. I mean, we're just not. Whether that would make the game better or not is a different discussion. But in reality, in 2025, uh, barring fundamental changes to how pitchers are developed and what we value as pitchers, even going down to the youth baseball level with velocity and spin and throwing breaking balls and knowing what that means to for pitchers' arms, boy, you need to load up on bullpen. And I'll continue to say it, right? Go look at the postseason. Go look at even the best starters. It was rare to see someone going 7 or 8 innings, right? And I'm talking about the studs of studs, right? Yeah, legitimate number one starters. I mean, I know Burns went deep into the game against Kansas City, but go back and look. How many times did Corbin Burns throw 7 innings last year? Not as many as people romanticize him to have done. So you need relief pitching. You need legitimate stud arms coming out of that bullpen. And I think the Orioles are in a better spot now than they were a year ago in that regard. But if it's not going to be a Dylan Cease or a Luis Castillo, and it wasn't Corbin Burns, it wasn't Blake Snell, it wasn't Max Fried, it wasn't even someone like Nathan Eovaldi, then you can look at it, build from the back forward, and look at the bullpen and see what you can do there to add and strengthen that because you're going to need that either way. So I
Tremblay,
don't know.
Trombley, Trombley, Trombley. Is that right?
Mike Trombley,
Uh,
right?
I'm
Yeah.
going to go. I'm going to
Not Dave
find
Tremblay. But
Mike
no,
Trombley, and I believe it was. I keep getting DeWitt's and DeJean's mixed up as
well,
well.
John, I think it was.
Okay, so Trombley came here on the 2000-2001 Orioles. So
It was so
if
dark
it's
already by then.
what's that?
It was so dark already by then.
Oh, it was terrible. There's no question about that. The '01
Hal left, and
Orioles.
then it's like, now what?
I'm trying to. Buddy Groom was a part of that.
Mhm.
Rick Bauer was going to set the world on fire. So was John Parrish. Oh, Sidney Ponsone's going to get it done. Maybe it was the 2000 team then. Now that I'm thinking about it, because like I really they all run together. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? In some sort of fun way, don't they?
they definitely do. And I want to make one more point, and this is, we were talking about the bullpen, but to go back to the 1 year contract concept. There's a name, and I may have mentioned this to you. I probably have because we've had at least enough discussions over the last couple of weeks about baseball and just the frustration and underwhelming nature of this offseason to this point, understanding there's still 5.5 weeks to go to spring training, 6 weeks to go to spring training. But instead of paying a 35-year-old Japanese pitcher who's never pitched in the majors and a 41-year-old pitcher who has been very durable, right? I want to be clear. When I point out that Charlie Morton is 41, I don't want to make it a punchline because Charlie Morton still made 30 starts last year and has made 30 starts every year other than a COVID season for the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, he's been very durable in terms of just posting up and taking the ball every fifth day. But if the Orioles are going to live in this world of 1 year contracts, who I would have really liked to have seen them go out there and sign to a 1 year deal, who the Red Sox did, albeit for $20 million rather than 15? Walker Buehler. Now, Walker Buehler had a bad regular season coming back from Tommy John surgery, did not look right, but go look at remember what he did in October last year. And I would have loved to have seen the Orioles take a chance on a 1 year deal on someone like that who, let's be clear, Walker Buehler could end up being bad. And that could be, well, $20 million down the drain, but it's still a 1 year deal. It's, $20 million isn't going to cripple any franchise long term. It hurts in the here and now, but it's not going to cripple you long term in the way that Chris Davis, or some deal like that does, where it doesn't work out. I would have loved to have seen the Orioles, if they're hell bent on 1 year deals for veteran pitchers, go out and sign a guy like Walker Bueller, who I think has such interesting upside in terms of, being another year removed from Tommy John surgery. And, like I said, he might not be very good for the Red Sox. Especially pitching half his games at Fenway. I mean, that could work out very poorly. But I think there's an intriguing enough upside play there where, if you're the Orioles and right now you look at your rotation, what are you missing? A number one or a number two starter, right? I mean, someone to put in that space. And then you can slot Grayson Rodriguez and or Eflin down one spot. I think everyone would feel a lot better, even if it's not a former Cy Young Award winner like Corbin Burns. I think Walker Bueller would have been really interesting in that way. And again, it's a risky profile. That's why you only got a 1 year deal, right? He's trying to, this is a prove it year for him. Now he's still getting $20 million, so that helps him. But the point is, you look at him and what he was just a few years ago. 2021, 2.47 ERA, 33 starts, 207 innings. He was an all-star. He finished fourth in Cy Young. He was an all-star back in 2019. And understanding that was a long time ago, but the difference is Walker Bueller's 30 compared to Sagano being 35 or Charlie Morton being 41. So if it were me and you were if Mike Elias, if I suddenly joined the Orioles front office and Mike Elias said, hey, our philosophy right now is, unless we're trying to land a big fish and hey, we tried with Corbin Burns, we didn't get it done. It happens. But otherwise, we're going to stick with 1 year deals. That's the kind of guy I would have liked to have seen. If you're going to do two of these, a $13 million deal and a $15 million deal, man, I would have liked to just pony up a little bit more and gone out and signed someone like Walker Bueller, who I think it's interesting. Again, he might be bad. He might be lousy for the Red Sox. I mean, he had a 5.3 ERA in 16 starts last year. He was a below replacement level starting pitcher in the regular season coming back from the injury. But man, he looked pretty good in October, right? He was on the mound when the Dodgers won the World Series. So, it looked it looked better. And look, it wasn't even perfect in October. He had a bad start in the division series, but looked good in the LCS, and he did some nice work in the World Series for the Dodgers. So that's where I just keep coming back to. All these moves they've made in isolation, I can at least understand where it's coming from. But man, at some point in time, you're going to need some more upside for this rotation, right? I mean, even Eflin, even putting Eflin in that number one, number two space, man, that's ambitious. I like Zach Eflin a lot, but 31, he's not a big strikeout guy. Like, he's more of a number three, ideally for me. So, and Grayson Rodriguez, the idea of Grayson Rodriguez as a number one, but the in practice to this point, it's been a guy who hasn't been durable, and he's had
I just
a
hope
little
we're
bit
not
of
talking the whole
inconsistency.
summer about the pitching. And listen,
Yeah,
I'll drop the ball on this, or we can continue on if you wish. But for me, I'm not a fatalist about this in saying if you're good enough to start the season and you want to give the kid that they got from the Marlins a chance, Trevor
yeah,
Rogers. If you
yeah,
want to promote, if you think that you've seen something in somebody that is a Suarez, right? That you feel like, I remember you and I down at JetBlue Park and Fort Myers last weekend. The Suarez guys pitching, and next thing you know, like he would have been pitching big games for them in October had they been good enough when he didn't pitch. He'd have been a part of what they needed to do, which clearly shows that they do not discriminate against Venezuelans. But I'll say this: trading deadline, the minor league capital that they have, that if Dylan Cease is not today, if not today, then on July 31st he might be cheaper because the Padres stink, and you could whatever.
yeah,
I'm not that they. I'm not the screaming fan.
right.
I'm not. That they have to spend, they have to do this. I'm 30 years into this. I've got a PTSD that nobody can comprehend in the audience because of what. So I'm at a different level with my belief or not belief, but I'm always fair. And the fair part is these guys have been pretty good at this. They've been pretty good at fixing people. They've been pretty good at doing it on the cheap. They've been pretty good at minding their dollars, even if they don't do it on the cheap, because I don't know that $13 million for a Japanese pitcher. I don't know that that's cheap. You tell me. I don't think signing Kimbrel was necessarily cheap last year. I think they've seen the holes, much in the same way you and I spent an hour and a half today discussing the Steelers and the Ravens, and like Kyle Hamilton's not a safety. They're not going to play him there. They're gonna sign a real safety and have him go be legendary at the 12th position or whatever they're going to call that thing. Um, the hybrid part of what they're trying to do with the totality of their pitching and the money that it takes to get there and the draft capital they have and the minor league capital they have and the ability to invest money in some guy from Japan that nobody else wanted at that level and give him a real opportunity to come in because they play it that way a little better than maybe some other organizations did. I remember when Angelos was here, I could still share that the Korean baseball, they had signs banning the Orioles. Literally, signs all over the facility banning the Orioles because they hated Dan Duquette that much in Korea. So, finding players in Korean leagues, finding players in other places. You and I talked Wei and Chen last week, which was a part of that administration back in the day. Being creative, I'm all for that. Watching Nichols, when a
Yeah.
billionaire comes in and says he's Mr. Big Shot and puts himself in the ads, and then they don't spend real money in the offseason, and they cry about finishing second for their number one starter that
Yeah.
they really, really wanted. Okay, if you really, really wanted him, that means you got $250 million to spend on somebody else. I'm not saying waste it, but step it up. Let's start the
Sure.
season with Cease. But if that doesn't happen, I'm still not they're not trying. I'm just gonna call it what it is. They haven't had a press conference. They have these Friday afternoon news dumps. Greg Bader's still running the television network. I have no idea what they're trying to sell me to watch the games on my way to Ocean City this summer. Like, the woman that's running the outfit has never had a press conference. She sat in the dugout with a couple of you. Like, what are you doing? Let's run the team. Football team's playing for a Super Bowl this month. Let's go. Be proud of signing Charlie Morton if you're proud of it. He spent $17 million on it. Homer would love that $17 million, and he deserves it more. Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke. I'll give you parting shot. I'll be like Mike Wilbon and Tony Korn will do it. Our parting shot today is brought to you by. Go ahead.
Right. Couple things. One, what, it was 15 million. I just wanted to clarify that.
15
But
million on Morton.
yes,
Okay,
15 on him,
13 on
13 on Sagano. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
how much was Kimbrel? So I get that number right.
Kimbrel was 13, I think, right? I think.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, sorry.
Okay.
Lots going on with playoffs and everything with going on with the Ravens. But I'll leave you with
41 and
this.
4. I don't want to mess you up.
I'll leave you with
MVP.
this. What was their and I'm not saying this to put you on the spot. This is an exercise, right? To prove my point. What was the Orioles
were
starting?
embarrassing me 20 years before you came along.
No. What was the Orioles starting rotation entering the 2023 season, which they won 101 games?
23 season to start the season.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm terrible at this.
No, but that's my point here. That's my point. It was Kyle Gibson. It was, and I don't remember the exact order to start the year. Kyle Gibson, Dean Kramer, Kyle Bradish, who actually got hit on the foot, and that was the reason they had to bring Grayson Rodriguez up, who, remember, had not made the rotation. Tyler Wells,
right?
Cole Irvin.
I'm getting there.
Cole Irvin. I mean, that's what we're talking about here now.
And they were waiting on Rodriguez because his arm wasn't right, and Palmer was talking. I remember all that, right?
Well, now, his arm was okay. He just didn't have a very good spring.
The big question that week was Stowers. I remember that was the week I had lunch with Mike Elias. Everybody was asking about Stowers, and everybody was pissed that Aaron Frazier was getting at bats at second base.
Adam Frazier, yeah.
I said Aaron Frazier.
No, but right, because there were people who thought Jordan Westberg was ready at that point in time. But my point in saying that is that team won 101 games. And now I will point out Kyle Bradish very much pitched like an ace over the course of that season. Kyle Bradish had, not quite as much in terms of innings. He was every bit as good as, if not better than what Corbin Burns was this past year. Go look at the numbers and tell me I'm wrong. Again, not quite as much in terms of innings, but in terms of strikeouts, ERA, go down the list. He was a stud. But my point is, no one knew he was going to be that at the beginning of 23. That doesn't mean I think that there's necessarily a Kyle Bradish ready to pop I'm not saying Trevor Rogers is ready to be that. No, no, not, heavens no. But my point is, and it's the point you were making, they probably have deserved a little bit more benefit of the doubt than a lot of people are giving them in terms of that. What's frustrating, what's underwhelming, and I will not back off of this point, and it was the basis of what I wrote at baltimorepositive.com. What's frustrating is they've got this intellect and they're smart and they've gotten themselves to this point, not just with the top 5 picks, but with everything else they've done, including the Albert Suarez type moves that they've made, that it feels like they have resources now to not have to rely solely on those types of things. Yet it feels like they're continuing to do that. And that's what's frustrating about this. There, you don't get any extra wins for having a lower payroll or not having any pitchers on long-term contracts or anything like that. Go make things a little easier on yourself, assuming you have new ownership that's willing to do that. But here we are, and it's Sagano, and it's Charlie Morton, and it's
Happy New
Tyler
Year.
O'Neill, and it's Gary Sanchez. And, we'll see. The offseason isn't over. No one had any inkling that Corbin Burns was coming. No one had mentioned Charlie Morton. So they clearly do a good job in the warehouse of keeping things bottled up, right? I mean, they don't leak things out in terms of, when they sign someone, it comes out of nowhere, typically. That's how this has generally worked the last couple of
And
years.
usually on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, but yeah, you just look at the upside and say, man, I want them to be better. And their young pitcher or their young position players, Jackson Holiday is going to be better. Some other guys that they have in that group are going to be better. Now, someone might be worse. Adley Rutschman was worse this past year, right? So you can't plan on everything going perfectly, but they still have a whole lot going for them. I'll continue to say that. But man, you need more upside with this rotation. You just do. And to your point, maybe that's going to come in the next 6 weeks, or maybe it's going to come in June or July via trade. I don't know. But yeah, it's tough to look at this rotation right now and say, man, that looks like a group that can play deep in October. There's no
The
way to look at
last
that.
2 years, would you say their pitching was good enough or not? Just a yes or no. In the end,
In the end, I
no.
mean, certainly not last year
Okay.
because of what happened. But
I,
again, but they couldn't. You can't go into a season planning to. I mean,
I'm
you
backing
have
up
to stay
your
healthy.
case here to wrap
Yeah,
things up, and I'm backing you up on the 23 rotation idea, which is, and this is the reality of looking at this in the totality. First off, you mentioned Burns, and he was such a big deal, and he got all the money and like all of that. He finished fifth in the Cy Young of voting in the American League last year. The
Bradish
year
was
before,
fourth.
Bradish finished fourth,
He
right?
was he
So
was outstanding.
who's
Yeah.
going to be that kind of guy in this rotation, right? I mean, who in the end is, if it's Grayson
Hope it's
Rodriguez?
Grayson Rodriguez because I'm not sure who else it would be. I
Okay,
really don't know
fair,
who else
fair
it would
enough.
be. Right?
Okay.
I mean,
Well, if you
other
feel like
guys could.
he's ascending and he's emerging and
You
you're
hope.
putting eggs in that basket, and on the other side of the basket, you're having the Charlie Mortons and the Saganos and maybe somebody else holding the water for that. To your point, and my point, we've been waiting 41 years in your case for a World Series around here. Go get Dylan Cease, give up some young guys,
Yeah.
put some money into this. Let's go. Your owner's
I'm
74
not
years old.
anti
Let's
that at
go.
all. It's just I'm
Yeah.
trying to look at this and I'm trying to see whether that's coming or not. And man, so many people would have been surprised to hear that they signed 2 pitchers, let alone if they're going to add a third, and that third being a top of the rotation guy. I mean, I'll believe it when I see it, But they've got the capital, they've got the farm system. They should have the money, even if it's another rental like Burns. So we shall see. But yeah, it's
So if
just
this were New York
underwhelming.
radio and this were the fan in New York, do something out there. Come on, do something
Do
out
something
there.
with more
41-year-old
upside, more
pitcher.
upside,
Yeah, I
more
mean, that's what
upside.
the internet sounded like on Friday night. And they're running from the guys they're signing by having Friday news dumps on snow weekends when the Ravens. It's just goofy.
When we have it, when we have, I'm not going to get into this now. When we have another opportunity to sit down and talk ball, when the
Better
Ravens,
damn well
whenever
be
the
over a
Ravens
crab
come to
cake.
an end, I want to talk about Charlie Morton because I think he's one of the more interesting pitchers of the last 15
Well,
years. And
might be already into
yeah,
spring training by then if Lamar has
yeah,
his way. We got playoff football this week, despite the fact that we do talk baseball around here because we're those guys. Get off my lawn. Yeah, I don't know. I follow baseball enough to love baseball enough to know when they're doing the right thing by the fans. And it's been a long time here. It just has been, and I'm
Yeah.
sick of it. And even the new president hiding from me, and just we're into a new year, Friday afternoon. It's business as usual. And that's this as a from a fan's perspective, they need to do better. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. Plenty of football. I promise we'll get back to that. We're Baltimore Positive. Stay with us.